When I realized that I was a prisoner, I nearly went mad. I rushed up and down the stairs, tried every door, and examined every window I could find. However, after a while, an overwhelming sense of helplessness consumed me. After hours of struggling in vain, I calmed down and realized that acting like a mouse thrashing in a trap was truly insane. Once I fully understood my total helplessness, I sat down in a state of calm. I had never been so calm in my life, and I began to consider what to do next. I thought that all was not yet completely lost. There was only one thing I was certain of. I mustn't let the Count know that I understood what was going on. He knew I was being confined. There was no doubt that he was the mastermind behind this, and surely there was a reason. I had to deceive him by pretending to believe everything he told me. I realized that I had only one plan: to keep my fear and the knowledge of what I had discovered to myself, while keeping my eyes wide open. In this case, I would either be deceived like a child, or I would have to throw myself into a desperate gamble to escape the situation. To achieve the latter, I needed to focus all my thoughts. As I was coming to this final decision, suddenly I heard the sound of the large door below closing, signaling that the Count had returned. He didn't go into the library right away, so I quietly returned to my room. I saw him making my bed. This was very strange, but it confirmed what I had suspected. Apart from him, I was completely alone in the castle. There were no servants. When I saw him slipping through the door hinges to set the dining table, I was certain. Since he did all the servants' work himself, it meant there was no one else in the castle, and the Count was the one who had driven the carriage the night I arrived. That thought terrified me. What kind of man could control wolves, keeping them silent with signs? What did the people in Bistritz and the ones in the carriage fear so terribly for me? Why did they give me the crucifix, garlic, wild roses, and mountain ash? God bless the kind woman who put the crucifix around my neck. Now, when I touch it, I feel a return of faith and strength. That strange object, which I had initially refused, now provides a sacred help in moments of solitude and confusion. Is this its true nature, or is it a tangible tool to carry the comfort and sympathy of others? I will try to verify this when I can, in order to confirm it for myself. In the meantime, I will learn more about Count Dracula, which may help me understand many other things. Tonight, perhaps he will talk about himself, if I steer the conversation in that direction. Of course, I must be careful not to raise any suspicions. Late at night, I had a long conversation with the Count. I asked him about the history of Transylvania, and he became very animated on this fascinating topic. He spoke of events and people, particularly battles, recounting them as if he had been there. Later, he explained that the pride of his family was immortalized in his house, and the name of the boyars was his pride. Their glory was his glory, and their fate was his fate. Whenever he spoke of his house, he used the word we, and conjugated verbs in the plural, as though he were a king talking about his empire. I wish I could record exactly what he said. It was so captivating. It almost recreated the entire history of this land. When telling these stories, he was so excited. He walked around the room, stroking his white beard, grabbing anything in his arms as though he were about to break it with his strength. While he spoke, I sat close, trying to absorb the lively story he was telling. We, the Sekellis, have every reason to be proud, for our veins run with the blood of brave warriors who fought with the heart of lions to win and protect this land. Here, in the vortex of Europe's long wars, the Ugric people came from Iceland to carry out a holy war led by Thor and Woden. These people made others believe they were werewolves. For many times their wrath caused terror across Europe's coasts, reaching Africa and Asia. When they met the Huns, they became the conquerors who scorched the earth like living flames. So much so that the dead thought their blood flowed from witches cast out of Scythia who had allied with devils in the desert. Fools, fools. What devil or witch could compare to Attila, whose heroic blood flows through our veins? He threw his hand up. We defeated all. We proudly proclaim that the Magyars, the Lombards, the Avars, the Bulgars, the Turks fell in multitudes at our borders. We pushed them all back. Is it not miraculous? When Arpid and his army swept through the Hungarian land, he met us at the border, and his great Hanfaglis campaign ended. Isn't that strange? Then, when the Hungarians surged eastward, the Szekelys shared in the glory of the Magyars' victory. We spent centuries guarding the Turkish frontier, and frontier work never ends. As the Turks say, the river may sleep, but the enemy never does. Who can be prouder than us? Those who in the Four Nations War received the sword of blood. Or in this very war, the call to rally our people had more power than that of any king. When is the time to avenge our national shame? The disgrace of Kosovo, when the banners of the Wallachians and Magyars fell beneath the crescent. Who in our lineage, like Voivode, crossed the Danube and subdued the Turks on their own soil? That is Dracula. It is only a shame that he was a contemptible brother, for when he was defeated, he sold out his family to the Turks and accepted the disgrace of slavery. But this is not the Dracula bloodline. This bloodline was passed down to never stop fighting. No matter how many times it was defeated, it would always rise again, alone in the blood-soaked fields, where his warriors lay slain, believing that even if left alone, he would still win the final victory. People say he only thought of himself. Ah, what happens to peasants without leaders? How can one win a war without the brain and heart to direct it? Again, after the battle at Mohacs, we overthrew Hungarian rule. We, the ones with Dracula's blood, stood against their leaders, for our tradition would never accept being slaves. Ah, young sir, the Szekelys, whose blood is Dracula's, whose brains and swords belong to us, are a proud people that the Habsburgs and the Romanovs cannot match. Today, war is over. Blood has become precious in these shameful days of peace, and the glories of past battles now live only in the legends retold through the years. By this time, it was nearly dawn, and we went to bed. Perhaps this journal has become something strange, like the story of 1001 Nights, where everything ends with the crowing of a rooster, or like the ghost of Hamlet's father. May 12th, let me begin with the events, simple and clear events, verified through books and images. I will not need to mix them up with observations or memories. On the last evening, when the Count came from his room, he began asking me questions about legal matters and conducting business. I had spent tiring days among the pages of books, solving some issues I had verified in the Lincoln Inn book. These were also requests from the Count, and I had made notes in a systematic manner. Sometimes this knowledge proved useful to me in some way. First, he asked me if one could have 2 private lawyers in England. I replied that, if one wished, they could hire a dozen, but a wise person would not hire more than 1 lawyer for a business matter. When there are 2 or more, instead of giving a single opinion on a matter, they will end up defending different ideas, which is only harmful. He seemed to understand. Then he asked about hiring someone to serve, communicate, and handle business, essentially someone to take care of everything when on a ship. He wanted a clear explanation to avoid any misunderstandings, and he said, I will illustrate. Your friend and mine, Mr. Peter Hawkins, who is hiding under the beautiful steeple of his cathedral in Exeter, in distant London, has bought me a place in London with your help. Good. Now let me speak plainly. Don't be surprised when I say I will not find a servant from among the residents of that far-off city of London, because no one there could serve my needs better than a person from my own land, while a local might serve in a way that is not purely to my liking but for himself or his friends, for example. Therefore, I will find my servant from the fields here, people who will labor solely at my command. Now, suppose I need to do business with cargo ships, say from Newcastle, Durham, Harwich, or Dover. Would it be difficult for me to delegate someone to work at such ports? I replied that nothing could be easier, but our lawyers have a branch system from place to place, so business in different locations could be fully handled under the direction of any local lawyer. A client would simply delegate their wishes to anyone, and the work would proceed without any trouble. But, he said, I can handle this directly, right? Of course, I replied. There are often such situations where some people have private business they don't want others to know about. Good, he said, and continued discussing the establishment of powers of attorney no mistakes were made. I explained everything to him as best I could, and clearly, he left with the impression that he was dealing with a distinguished lawyer, so he suspected nothing. While he remained immersed in self-satisfaction, and I was checking everything in the books, he suddenly stopped and said, "It seems you have written something after your first letter to our friend Mr. Peter Hawkins, right?" With a slight start in my heart, I replied that I had not, as I had seen no need to send letters to anyone. "Then write," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Write to our friend and to anyone you need to inform that you will be staying with me for another month, if that does not inconvenience you." "You want me to stay with you that long?" I asked, feeling my heart grow cold for a moment. "I very much wish for that, and I do not want to hear any refusal. When your employer asks someone to represent him for the purpose of consulting with me, surely that person will do their best, right?" What could I do but bow in agreement? This was Mr. Hawkins' business, not mine, and I should think of him, not just myself. Besides, through the look in the Count's eyes and his gestures, I was reminded that I was a prisoner, and I had no other choice. When the Count saw my agreement in my bow, seeing his victory in my confusion, he began to use them skillfully, unstoppable. "I trust that, my young friend, you will not add anything beyond our business in those letters. It will reassure your friends that you are in good health and will return home once the work is complete. Do you agree?" While speaking, he handed me 3 stacks of letters and 3 envelopes, all made of the thinnest paper available abroad. Then, with a quiet smile, he bared his sharp canine teeth from behind his red lips, as though saying that I should be careful about what I wrote in the letters, because he could read them. So, I decided that I would temporarily write the letters as he wished, and secretly recount everything to Mr. Hawkins, and write to Mina using some abbreviations that would puzzle the Count and make him grimace if he tried to decipher. After I finished writing the 2 letters, I sat quietly and read my book, while the Count wrote a great deal, referencing several books on the table. Then he took my 2 letters, placed them among his papers, and immediately left, closing the door behind him. I leaned over the table and read the letters still lying on it. I had no regret for my actions because, in this situation, I had to protect myself by any means necessary. One letter was sent to Samuel F. Billington, 7 Crescent, Whitby, and another to her Lutner, Varna. The third went to Coutts and Company, London, and the fourth to Heron Klopstock and Bilruth, Bank Directors, Budapest. The second and fourth letters were not yet sealed. I was just about to read them when I saw the doorknob turn. I quickly sat back in my chair, pretended to read my book again before the Count returned with another letter in hand. He gathered the letters on the table, carefully sealed them, and turned back to me, saying, "I trust you will forgive me, as I have some matters to attend to this evening. I hope you will have a pleasant night." As he reached the door, he paused, turned back hesitantly, and added, "I will give you some advice, my young friend. To be more precise, this is a very serious recommendation. Outside your room, there is nowhere in this castle where you can safely spend the night. This is an old castle, full of stories from the past, and it brings nightmares to those who are foolish enough. Be careful. Stay in your room. If anything happens elsewhere, return quickly to your room or the surrounding chambers. That is where you will sleep soundly. If you do not heed this warning..." He ended his speech with a threatening gesture, as if sweeping away something. I understood. I only wondered if there could be any nightmare worse than the terrifying and supernatural web of mysterious and sinister things closing in around me. Late at night. I had recorded everything he said, but I didn't add my doubts. I wasn't afraid to sleep anywhere in the castle if he wasn't present. I would place my crucifix on my pillow, and I believed that it would release me from any nightmares. When he left, I went to my room. After a while, when I heard no more sounds, I went out and climbed a stone staircase. From there, I could look south. A vast expanse of land stretched out before me, and the longing for freedom burned even stronger as I compared it to the narrow, dark courtyard of the castle. Seeing it, I became more acutely aware that I was a true prisoner, with terrifying thoughts. God knows that the source of my horrifying fears lies in this cursed land. I gazed at the vast, beautiful land bathed in the bright light of the full moon, as though it were midday. In that mystical light, the towering hills seemed to dissolve into the smooth night of valleys and gaps in the mountains. This beauty captivated me completely. Every breath I took brought with it serenity and a sense of comfort. As I leaned out from the window, I suddenly saw something moving below me, on the left side, where I believed, according to the layout of the castle, was the window to the Count's room. The window I was standing at was large and tall, framed in stone, and seemed impervious to the elements. But clearly, something was happening down there. I quickly drew back behind the stone sill and watched closely. I saw the Count's head poke out from the window. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I knew it was a person by the shape of his neck and the movement of his back and arms. I could not mistake those arms, which I had felt the strength of many times before. I felt a strange sense of amusement and, to some extent, humor, because anything small would amuse you when you are a prisoner. But I quickly shifted to terror and fear when I saw the Count's entire body emerge from the window and begin to crawl down. The castle was surrounded by deadly precipices, and as the Count descended, his gray cloak billowed out like enormous wings. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought it was an illusion caused by the moonlight, a trick of the darkness. But as I continued to observe, I knew I was not mistaken. I saw his fingers and the tips of his shoes cling to the edges of the stones on the wall, their mortar eroded by time, using every jagged corner to slide down at an eerie speed, like a lizard crawling on the wall. What kind of person, or rather, what kind of creature, could do such things? I was terrified of the haunted land that held me in its grip. I was afraid, terrified to the point of trembling, and I felt almost certain that I could no longer escape this place. I was surrounded by horrors I dared not even think about. May 15th. Once again, I saw the Count slither out, like a lizard. He crawled down a slanted path to the left that extended for hundreds of feet. When his head had disappeared, I stretched forward to try and see more, but it was futile. The distance was too great, and my view was completely obstructed. I knew at this point that he had left the castle, and this was the moment I needed to take advantage of to explore more of the castle, something I had never dared do before. I returned to my room, grabbed a lamp, and tried all the doors. As I had expected, they were all locked, and the locks still seemed new. But when I descended the stone stairs to the main hall, the same hall I had entered when I first arrived, I noticed I could push open the bolt and easily undo the heavy chain. But the door was locked and the key had been taken. That key must be in the Count's room. Perhaps his room wasn't locked, and I could get the key and escape. I carefully checked every hallway and staircase, trying all the doors. One or two small doors near the main hall were unlocked, but inside, there was nothing of interest, just old dusty items worn down by time and rats. However, I found a door at the top of the stairs, which, although locked, I managed to budge. I pushed harder and found that the door wasn't actually locked. It was jammed by a loose hinge, and the door was heavy, as if it had been leaning against the floor. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I pushed with all my might to get it open enough for me to squeeze through. Now I found myself on another floor of the castle, perhaps one level below, to the right of the room I knew. From the window, I could see a row of rooms stretching along the southern side of the castle, with the last window facing west and south. Both sides were sheer cliffs. The castle was built on a high rock, with three sides that were inaccessible, with towering windows no sling, bow, or pigeon could reach. To the west was a wide valley, stretching out to distant hills, their peaks connected in the distance. Between the sheer cliffs were mountain ash trees and thorns, their roots firmly embedded in the cracks and crevices of the rock. I assumed this part of the castle had once been used by women, as the furnishings in the room seemed more comfortable than the others. The window here was curtained, and the golden moonlight poured in through the sparkling windows, making everything appear brighter, even though it was shrouded in dust, as if trying to disguise itself from the ravages of time and the rats. young lady once sat, dreaming shyly, writing her love letters. I continued to write shorthand in my journal, recording everything that had happened to me since the last time I closed it. It is now the end of the 19th century, but if my feelings are not mistaken, centuries past still possess powers that modernity cannot destroy. Late at night, the morning of May 16th, God have mercy on my sanity, for that is what I need. Safety and assurances of safety belong to the past. While I live here, I can only hope for one thing, that I do not go mad, if I am not already mad. If I am still sane, then I will surely lose my mind when I think of the terrible things that have taken place in this wretched place of the Count's. That is the worst thing for me. If only the Count were the only one here, I would be safe, although that is only because I am still of use to him. Almighty God, merciful God, grant me calm, to escape the lies and madness that are happening. I have found new rays of light amidst the confusion that haunts me. Now I understand what Shakespeare meant when he had Hamlet say, "My notes, quickly my notes, I will write as soon as I have them," etc. Now, whenever I feel my mind slipping, or the shocks are about to overwhelm me, I find balance in my journal. This habit has truly calmed me. The Count's mysterious warnings once terrified me for a while. They no longer scare me when I think about them because in the future, he will continue to hold me in his ghastly grip, and I will fear to understand what he might say. When I finished writing the journal, fortunately, I managed to hide it and tuck it away just as I began to feel sleepy. The Count's warnings lingered in my mind, but I was quite willing to defy his orders. The drowsiness overwhelmed me, and with it came the rebellious desire that made sleep all the more enticing. The moonlight was soft, and the vast expanse, though it did not offer freedom, gave me a sense of restoration. I decided that tonight I would not return to my eerie, gloomy room but would sleep here instead, where once the young ladies had sat by the window, singing, living peaceful lives while their thoughts were filled with sorrow for men lost to the brutal wars. I saw a large divan near the corner of the room, and when I lay down, I could enjoy the picturesque scenery to the east and south. Not caring about the dust, I managed to lull myself to sleep. I thought I was in a dream. I hoped so, but I feared that what was about to happen to me was very real, unfolding in the bright daylight, and I couldn't believe it was a dream. I wasn't alone. The room was as it had been, unchanged since I entered. Under the bright moonlight, I could see the marks of my feet on the floor, disturbing the thick layers of dust that had accumulated here. Standing before me in the moonlight were three young women, three ladies, by their dress and appearance. When I saw them, I thought I was dreaming because there were no shadows on the floor from them. They came closer to me, observing me for a while, then began whispering to each other. Two of them were dark-skinned, with eagle-like noses like the Count's, their black, deep-set eyes glowing, seemingly red in contrast with the pale yellow moonlight. The third woman was beautiful, stunning, with golden hair and eyes that sparkled like emeralds. I seemed to recognize this beautiful face, though I couldn't place where or how I had seen it before. All three had magnificent, pearly white teeth on lips full of alluring rose pink. There was something about them that unsettled me. Half of me yearned for them, and half of me was terrified. I felt an intense, burning desire in my chest, an uncontrollable urge to be kissed by their red-hot lips. Perhaps it is unwise to write this down, for one day it might reach Mina and cause her pain, but it is the truth. They whispered to each other, then all three burst into laughter, the clear sound of silver clinking, but with something unsettling in their laughter. It was not a sound that could come from the soft lips of humans. It had a harsh, jarring tone, like clumsy hands on a violin. The beautiful girl tossed her head flirtatiously, and the other two began arguing with her. One of them said, "Go ahead, you start and we will follow. You're right to begin." The other added, "He's young and strong. We will all kiss him." I lay still on the bed, glancing through my half-closed eyelids at the happiness that was about to unfold. bittersweetness, a sense of aggression, like a creature sensing blood. I didn't dare open my eyes fully, but I could see clearly through the slits. The girl knelt by my head, leaning in with extreme longing. It was a longing that was both passionate and revolting. She twisted her neck and licked her lips like an animal. I could see in the moonlight the shimmering moisture on her red lips, and the pink tongue licking along her sharp, white teeth. Her head sank lower and lower, her lips trailing down my mouth and chin, quickly moving toward my throat. When she paused, I could hear her tongue circling around my lips and teeth, and I could feel her warm breath on my neck. Then, the sensitive skin of my throat itched, as if someone was tickling me, getting closer, closer still. I felt her soft, trembling lips on the most sensitive part of my throat, her jagged teeth pressing against it, then stopping. I closed my eyes tightly in a dizzying, irrational state, waiting with the thumping of my heart in my chest. But in an instant, another sensation swept through me like lightning. I felt as if the Count had arrived, furious beyond belief. I couldn't help but open my eyes, and I saw his dreadful arm grab the slender throat of the beautiful girl, twisting it back with terrifying strength. His eyes, now a fierce green, burned with rage. His teeth gritted in a snarl of fury, his high cheekbones flushed with wild anger. But the Count, I could never have imagined such anger and wrath, even from a demon. His eyes blazed. The red in his eyes was horrifying, as if hellfire were burning behind them. His face was deathly pale, with veins standing out like thick wires. His thick eyebrows almost met his nose, looking like a hot metal rod. With an angry movement, he threw the girl aside and stalked toward the other two, as if about to devour them. His demeanor was like the haughty way he had once shown to the wolves. In a voice, soft as a whisper yet tearing through the air like a bell, he spoke. "Who gave you permission to touch him, all of you? Who allowed you to appear before him when I forbade it? Get out, all of you. This man belongs to me. If you dare touch him again, beware." The beautiful girl burst into mocking laughter and defiantly turned back to him, saying, "You never knew love. You never knew love at all." And the other girls joined in with heavy, lifeless laughter, echoing throughout the room, making me almost gag to hear it. It sounded like the grotesque yearning of demons. The Count turned away, after carefully observing my face, and whispered gently, "Yes, I can love as well. You've known that in the past, haven't you? Good. I promise that when I'm done with him, you can kiss him if you wish. But for now, get out. Get out. I have to wake him. There are matters to resolve. Are we getting nothing tonight?" One of them asked, with a sorrowful laugh, pointing to a bag that he had thrown on the floor, moving as though something alive was inside. He nodded in response. One of the women jumped over and opened it. If my ears didn't deceive me, I heard a faint, labored cry of a half-baby emerging from it. The girl walked around the bag, and I was horrified beyond belief. But when I looked back, they were gone, along with the horrifying bag. There was no door near them, and they couldn't have left without me seeing. They simply vanished into the moonlight and passed through the window, and I could still see their fleeting shadows outside for a moment before they completely disappeared. The horror had overwhelmed me, and I collapsed, unconscious. When I woke up, I found myself lying in my bed. If I hadn't just experienced a dream, the Count must have carried me back to my room. I tried to reassure myself that I had only dreamed, but that couldn't explain what was going on around me. One small example to be sure of this was that my clothes had been removed and neatly folded, but I never fold clothes that way. My watch had been taken off, but I always wear my watch while I sleep, and there were many such details. But what happened to me was so unbelievable that I could explain it as my mind being disturbed, my nerves unraveling. I needed to review this. There was only one thing that pleased me. That was, if the Count really had taken me back to my room and changed my clothes, he must have done it in great haste, without inspecting my bag. And clearly, he didn't know what I had written in the journal, or else he would have taken it or destroyed it. Now, my room, I viewed it as my refuge, though it was still filled with terrifying sensations. Nothing could be more frightening than those dreadful women, those who hungered for my blood. May 18th, when I went down to that room during the day to uncover the truth, the door at the top of the stairs was closed. It had been blocked with a wooden ladder to prevent any attempts to push it open. I saw that the door wasn't locked, but it had been tightly fastened from the inside. So, it wasn't a dream, as I had feared, and I needed to act on this realization. May 19th, I'm certain that hard work lies ahead. Last night, the Count asked me to write 3 letters in a threatening tone. The first stated that I was nearly done with my work and would soon return home. The second said I had left that morning to write the letter, and the third stated that I had left the castle and was in Bistritz. I wanted to resist, but I saw that, given the current situation, being completely under the Count's power, nothing would be more foolish than publicly arguing with him. Refusal would only stir suspicion in his mind and make him angry. He must know I know too much, and letting me live is dangerous for him. My only chance is to delay things. Maybe some event will occur and give me a chance to escape. I had already seen the fury in his eyes when he threw the beautiful woman aside. He explained that the post office here works erratically, and that I should write my letters now to keep my friends from worrying. He assured me that the letters would be kept in Bistritz while I was here and would be sent at the appropriate time. Arguing would only make him more suspicious, so I pretended to agree with his ideas and asked him how I should date the letters. He thought for a moment and then replied, "The first should be dated June 12th, the second June 19th, and the third June 29th. I knew that would be the remainder of my life. God help me, May 28th. There is a chance to escape or at least send some news home. A band of scanny gypsies just arrived and set up camp on the castle grounds. They are a group of gypsies I have written about. Although they are still connected with other gypsy tribes around the world, they are very special here. They have thousands of people in Hungary and Transylvania and always live outside the law. They have their own rules, their own notions of nobility, and call each other by special names. They fear nothing, have no faith though still superstitious, and speak to each other in their own Deegan language. I'll write some letters home and ask them to deliver them." I tried to make contact through the window. They tipped their hats, bowed, and made several gestures. But I understood about as much of it as I do their language, meaning I understood almost nothing. I finished the letters. I wrote to Mina using abbreviations and asked Mr. Hawkins to send them. I explained my current situation to Mina, but didn't mention the horrors I've only suspected. It would shock her and terrify her to death if I told her everything. So, if the letters aren't sent, the Count won't be able to learn my secrets and what I've uncovered. I sent the letters. I threw them from the window bars with some gold coins and gestured that I wanted them delivered. The man who picked up the letter pressed it to his chest, bowed, and tucked it into his cap. There was nothing more I could do. I returned to the library and began writing. When the Count isn't around, I come here to write. The Count arrived. He sat next to me, and with the most pleasant tone, he pulled out 2 letters. The Scaney just gave me these, and although I don't know why they have them, of course I accepted them. Here. He must have already read them. One is from you to our friend Peter Hawkins. The other, when he opened the envelope and saw the strange symbols in the letter, his face darkened. His eyes flared with wild anger. This letter is an abomination. It damages the friendship and hospitality between us. It isn't signed. Fine. It won't cause any problems between us. He calmly threw the letter and envelope into the fire until they were completely burned. He continued, "As for the letter to Mr. Hawkins, of course, I will send it since it's yours. Your mail is sacred to me. Please forgive me for accidentally opening it. Would you mind sealing it again?" He handed the letter back to me, and with a polite bow, gave me an empty envelope. All I could do was comply in silence. When he left, I heard the key turn softly. A few He said, "Oh, my friend, are you tired? Please, get into bed. That's the best place to sleep. I can't talk to you tonight, as I have many things to do, but I hope you have a good rest." I went into the room and climbed into bed, and strangely, I slept soundly with no dreams. Desperation brought with it peace. May 31st. This morning, when I woke up, I intended to search through my bag for some paper and envelopes to put in my bag, so I could write again when I had the chance. But once again, I was met with a shock. All my papers were gone, all my documents, including train tickets, travel papers, and checks. Everything I would need when I leave the castle had vanished. I sat for a moment, then an idea came to me. I hurried to check my suitcase, where I had hung my clothes. All the necessary clothes for going outside, including my overcoat and bedding, had been taken. What a vile plan. June 17th. This morning, as I sat by the bed, trying to calm my mind, I heard the sound of horses' hooves on the rocky cliff, with no sound of whips, cracks, or shouting. I was overjoyed and rushed to the window. I saw 2 large carriages, each pulled by 8 strong horses, coming into the yard. The drivers of each carriage were Slovaks, with wide-brimmed hats, thick belts, and dirty sheepskin outfits with tall boots. They also carried staffs. I rushed toward the door, planning to run downstairs and join them. I thought the door would open to let them in, but once again I was shocked. The door to my room had been locked from the outside. I rushed back to the window, calling out to them. They glanced at me curiously and pointed, but the headman of the Skaney came forward, saw them pointing at me, said something, and burst into laughter. Thus, my efforts, my pitiful cries, my desperate pleas, did nothing. They resolutely turned away. The carriages were heavily loaded with large square boxes, tied with thick ropes. Clearly, they were empty, as the Slovaks handled them easily, and there was a hollow sound when they carelessly dragged them along. Once they had unloaded everything and piled it into a large heap in a corner of the yard, the Slovaks received money from the Skaney, spat on it for luck, and slowly turned the horses around. Only a moment later, I heard the sound of their whips fading and growing distant. June 24th. Last night, the Count said goodbye to me early and locked himself in his room. Immediately, I boldly rushed down the winding stairs and looked out the window to the south. I thought it was wise to keep an eye on the Count about what might happen next. The Skaney were gathering around the castle, doing some work. I could guess what they were up to because, from time to time, I heard the muffled sound of picks and shovels. Whatever it was leading to the culmination of a vile, ruthless plan. I stood at the window for about half an hour when I suddenly saw something poke out of the Count's window. I crouched down and watched closely as I saw his entire body emerge. It was another shock when I realized he was wearing the clothes I had worn when I arrived, with the dreadful bag I had seen the women carry slung over his shoulder. I no longer had any doubts about his intentions when wearing my clothes. This was a new, cruel plan of the Count. He would let everyone believe they had seen me, creating an obvious piece of evidence that I was in the town, and the villagers were delivering letters for me. Then, whatever evil acts he was about to commit would be blamed on me by the locals. What drove me mad was how everything kept unfolding while I had to stand mute. A true prisoner, even without any protection or comfort under any law, not even the law for criminals. I thought I should wait until the Count returned, and I persisted in standing by the window for a long time. Suddenly, I began to notice tiny specks of light in the moonbeams. They looked like tiny dust particles, gradually gathering into a misty cloud. I watched them with a sense of calm, feeling my heart settle again. I crept closer to the arrow slit, settling into a comfortable position to enjoy the play of the air. Suddenly, a deep and mournful wolf's howl echoed from the valley, out of my sight, making me jump. It grew louder and louder in my ears, and the dust cloud shifted into different shapes as though it were dancing under the moonlight. I felt I had to fight fiercely against my own instincts. My soul was in turmoil, and half of my perception was raging. responding to the call of the wolf's howl. I was beginning to be hypnotized. The cloud of dust danced faster and faster. The moonlight seemed to pulse, trying to draw me into the eerie, misty mass. It gathered more and more, slowly taking shape as the vague figures of ghosts. I suddenly snapped back to my senses and screamed loudly, shaking the land. The ghosts forming from the moonlight were the haunting women who had tormented me. I ran frantically back to my room. I felt it was the safest place for me now, a place without the moonlight, only the lamp casting its glow. A few hours later, I heard sounds from the Count's room, like muffled, pitiful moans. Then there was a deep, chilling silence that made my skin crawl, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to open the door, but it was locked tight, trapping me inside. Unable to do anything else, I simply sat down and screamed. Sitting down, I couldn't hear any other sounds in the land, except for the mournful moans of a woman. I rushed to the window, pulled back the curtain, and peered through the bars. It was indeed a woman, her hair disheveled, her hands clutching her chest as though exhausted from trying to run. She reached up to a corner of the door. When she saw me, she lunged forward, screaming in a voice full of threats. "Monster, give me back my child." She collapsed to her knees, raised her hand, and screamed the same thing again, her tones squeezing my heart. Then, she ripped at her hair, beat her chest, throwing herself into the ultimate expression of suffering. Finally, she lunged again. I could no longer see her, but I could hear her bare arms thudding against the door. From above, perhaps from the tower's peak, came the dry, harsh whispers of the Count. Perhaps his call was answered by the long, wide howls of the wolves. A few minutes later, a crowd of wolves appeared, like hellish demons forced into submission, rushing into the main entrance toward the fence. There were no more screams from the woman, only the short howls of the wolves. After a while, they dispersed and licked their lips. I didn't pity the woman. I knew that with what had happened to her child, she would rather die than live. What should I do? What can I do? How can I escape the terrifying horrors of the dark night, of these dark and fearful things? June 25th. Who knows how sweet and dear the emotions are in the heart and eyes of a man when he suffers from the night's pain. But the morning brings a sense of sweetness. As the sun rose high this morning, striking the top of the large front gate opposite me, a beam of light touched me like a messenger bringing good fortune. My fears melted away into the faint shell of the warm sunlight. I must act under the encouragement of the daylight shining on me. Last night, one of my predated letters was sent, starting the blood-soaked plans that would erase all traces of my existence on this earth. Don't think about it anymore. I am always troubled by the threats and fears of the night. I have never encountered the Count during the day. Does he sleep while others are awake and stay awake when others sleep? If only I could get into his room. But that is impossible. The door is always locked with no way in. In fact, there's still one way if I dare to take it. The place where he can escape. Couldn't others do the same? I've seen him crawl out of the window. So why not imitate him and crawl into his window? It's a risky move, but I must take even greater risks. I will gamble with it. The worst that could happen is death, but human death isn't the same as the death of a calf. Maybe I will be reborn in the next life. God will help my plan. Goodbye, Mina, if I fail. Goodbye, my loyal friends and my second father. Goodbye to all, and after everything, Mina, late at night, same day. I did my best, and God helped me return to my room safely. I must write down everything in order, as accurately as possible. I gathered all my courage, approached the window, and began climbing out. The large, jagged rocks, the mortar nearly worn away by time, made the climb difficult. I took off my shoes and began my adventure. I glanced down once, and knew that one more unexpected glance would make the terrifying abyss win over me. So I avoided looking at it. I set my direction and the distance to the Count's window well, and with all my strength, I seized every opportunity. I was so excited that I no longer felt dizzy or faint, and it seemed like only a moment later I was standing on the edge of the Count's window, reaching for the frame. However, I felt deeply moved when I bent down and slid into the window. Then I looked around the room for the Count, beginning my exploration with astonishment and indescribable joy. The room was empty. Inside were only a few unfamiliar, neglected items that looked as if they had never been used. The room's furnishings were in the same condition as the southern room, covered in dust. I searched for the key, but it wasn't in the lock, nor could I find it anywhere. The only thing I found was a huge pile of gold stacked in a corner. Coins from Italy, England, Austria, Hungary, Greece, and Turkey, covered in dust, clearly left here for a long time. None of them were less than 300 years old. There were also copper coins, jewelry, and ornaments, but they were old and faded. In one corner of the room was a large door, and I continued to search. The key I wanted, whether for the room or the outer door, was still nowhere to be found, and I had to keep looking or risk my efforts being in vain. The door opened, leading to a stone passage with a winding staircase going down. I descended cautiously, step by step. I walked down a dark, narrow passage, dimly lit. At the end of the passage was a heavy door that opened, leading into an ancient, dilapidated church that had now been turned into a graveyard. The ceiling had collapsed and 2 pieces fell onto the crypt, but the floor had recently been dug up. In the center of the room were large wooden boxes clearly brought in by the Slovaks. June 24th. Last night, the Count bid me farewell early and locked himself in his room. Immediately, I boldly rushed down the winding stairs and looked out the window to the south. I thought it was wise to keep an eye on the Count and what was about to happen. The Scani were gathering around the castle, doing some kind of work. I could guess what it was because, from time to time, I heard the muffled sounds of picks and shovels. Whatever it was leading to the culmination of a vile, ruthless plan. I stood at the window for about half an hour when I suddenly saw something protruding from the Count's window. I crouched down and watched closely as I saw his entire body emerge. It was another shock when I realized he was wearing the clothes I had worn when I arrived, with the dreadful bag I had seen the women carry slung over his shoulder. I no longer had any doubts about his intentions when wearing my clothes. This was a new, cruel plan of the Count. He would let everyone believe they had seen me, creating an obvious piece of evidence that I was in the town, and the villagers were delivering letters for me. Then, whatever evil acts he was about to commit would be blamed on me by the locals. What drove me mad was how everything kept unfolding while I had to stand mute. A true prisoner, even without any protection or comfort under any law, not even the law for criminals. I thought I should wait until the Count returned, and I persisted in standing by the window for a long time. Suddenly, I began to notice tiny specks of light in the moonbeams. They looked like tiny dust particles, gradually gathering into a misty cloud. I watched them with a sense of calm, feeling my heart settle again. I crept closer to the arrow slit, settling into a comfortable position to enjoy the play of the air. Suddenly, a deep and mournful wolf's howl echoed from the valley, out of my sight, making me jump. It grew louder and louder in my ears, and the dust cloud shifted into different shapes as though it were dancing under the moonlight. I felt I had to fight fiercely against my own instincts. My soul was in turmoil, and half of my perception was raging, responding to the call of the wolf's howl. I was beginning to be hypnotized. The cloud of dust danced faster and faster. The moonlight seemed to pulse, trying to draw me into the eerie, misty mass. It gathered more and more, slowly taking shape as the vague figures of ghosts. I suddenly snapped back to my senses and screamed loudly, shaking the land. The ghosts forming from the moonlight were the haunting women who had tormented me. I ran frantically back to my room. I felt it was the safest place for me now, a place without the moonlight, only the lamp casting its glow. A few hours later, I heard sounds from the Count's room, like muffled, pitiful moans. Then there was a deep, chilling silence that made my skin crawl, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to open the door, but it was locked tight, trapping me inside. Unable to do anything else, I simply sat down and screamed. Sitting down, I couldn't hear any other sounds in the land, except for the mournful moans of a woman. I rushed to the window, pulled back the curtain, and peered through the bars. It was indeed a woman, her hair disheveled, her hands clutching her chest as though exhausted from trying to run. She reached up to a corner of the door. When she saw me, she lunged forward, screaming in a voice full of threats. "Monster, give me back my child." She collapsed to her knees, raised her hand, and screamed the same thing again, her tones squeezing my heart. Then, she ripped at her hair, beat her chest, throwing herself into the ultimate expression of suffering. Finally, she lunged again. I could no longer see her, but I could hear her bare arms thudding against the door. From above, perhaps from the tower's peak, came the dry, harsh whispers of the Count. Perhaps his call was answered by the long, wide howls of the wolves. A few minutes later, a crowd of wolves appeared, like hellish demons forced into submission, rushing into the main entrance toward the fence. There were no more screams from the woman, only the short howls of the wolves. After a while, they dispersed and licked their lips. I didn't pity the woman. I knew that with what had happened to her child, she would rather die than live. What should I do? What can I do? How can I escape the terrifying horrors of the dark night, of these dark and fearful things? June 25th. Who knows how sweet and dear the emotions are in the heart and eyes of a man when he suffers from the night's pain. But the morning brings a sense of sweetness. As the sun rose high this morning, striking the top of the large front gate opposite me, a beam of light touched me like a messenger bringing good fortune. My fears melted away into the faint shell of the warm sunlight. I must act under the encouragement of the daylight shining on me. Last night, one of my predated letters was sent, starting the blood-soaked plans that would erase all traces of my existence on this earth. Don't think about it anymore. I am always troubled by the threats and fears of the night. I have never encountered the Count during the day. Does he sleep while others are awake and stay awake when others sleep? If only I could get into his room. But that is impossible. The door is always locked with no way in. In fact, there's still one way if I dare to take it. The place where he can escape. Couldn't others do the same? I've seen him crawl out of the window, so why not imitate him and crawl into his window? It's a risky move, but I must take even greater risks. I will gamble with it. The worst that could happen is death, but human death isn't the same as the death of a calf. Maybe I will be reborn in the next life. God will help my plan. Goodbye, Mina, if I fail. Goodbye, my loyal friends and my second father. Goodbye to all, and after everything, Mina, late at night, same day. I did my best, and God helped me return to my room safely. I must write down everything in order, as accurately as possible. I gathered all my courage, approached the window, and began climbing out. The large, jagged rocks, the mortar nearly worn away by time, made the climb difficult. I took off my shoes and began my adventure. I glanced down once, and knew that one more unexpected glance would make the terrifying abyss win over me. So I avoided looking at it. I set my direction and the distance to the Count's window well, and with all my strength, I seized every opportunity. I was so excited that I no longer felt dizzy or faint, and it seemed like only a moment later I was standing on the edge of the Count's window, reaching for the frame. However, I felt deeply moved when I bent down and slid into the window. Then I looked around the room for the Count, beginning my exploration with astonishment and indescribable joy. The room was empty. Inside were only a few unfamiliar, neglected items that looked as if they had never been used. The room's furnishings were in the same condition as the southern room, covered in dust. I searched for the key, but it wasn't in the lock, nor could I find it anywhere. The only thing I found was a huge pile of gold stacked in a corner. coins from Italy, England, Austria, Hungary, Greece, and Turkey, covered in dust, clearly left here for a long time. None of them were less than 300 years old. There were also copper coins, jewelry, and ornaments, but they were old and faded. In one corner of the room was a large door, and I continued to search. The key I wanted, whether for the room or the outer door, was still nowhere to be found, and I had to keep looking or risk my efforts being in vain. The door opened, leading to a stone passage with a winding staircase going down. I descended cautiously, step by step. I walked down a dark, narrow passage, dimly lit. At the end of the passage was a heavy door that opened, leading into an ancient, dilapidated church that had now been turned into a graveyard. The ceiling had collapsed and 2 pieces fell onto the crypt, but the floor had recently been dug up. In the center of the room were large wooden boxes clearly brought in by the Slovaks. The box was still in its place, near the wall, but its lid had been closed. Not locked, but the nails were fastened, only waiting for a hammer to strike. I knew I had to find the key on the Count's body, so I lifted the lid and tossed it towards the wall. What I saw made my hair stand on end in terror. The Count was lying there, but he seemed to have aged half as much. His silver hair and beard were now streaked with salt and pepper. His cheeks were fuller, and his pale skin now had a hint of pink. His mouth was redder than ever, with blood trickling from the corner of his lips down his chin and neck. Even his deep, fiery eyes had swollen, the corners of his eyes sagging. It seemed that this whole abominable creature was sustained solely by blood. He lay there like a gorged leech, satisfied after feeding. I shuddered as I leaned down and touched him, and every sense in my body tore apart at the touch. But I had to keep searching, or I would fail. When night came, my body would be the great feast after the battle with the 3 terrifying creatures. I searched all over the Count's body, but couldn't find the key. A mocking smile appeared on his swollen face, which nearly drove me insane. This meant I would be sent back to London, and perhaps centuries later, he would come, with millions of creatures helping him satisfy his thirst for fresh blood, continuing the cycle of creating more helpless, wandering monsters. This thought drove me mad. An overwhelming desire seized me to wipe this kind of demon off the face of the earth. With no weapon in hand, I grabbed a spade used by the workers to dig the earth, lifted it up, and swung the blade at that hateful face. But as I turned around, the Count's gaze fixed on me, his eyes glowing with the wildness of a serpent. His stare paralyzed me, and the spade trembled in my hands, only grazing his face, leaving a deep scratch on his forehead. The spade slipped from my grasp, falling across the box. When I pulled it out, the blade also dragged the lid of the box, which fell back into place, shielding me from that terrifying gaze. The last thing I saw on his bloated, blood-smeared, grotesque face, which should have been kept in the lowest levels of hell, was enough to make me feel like I had lost my mind. I thought about what to do next, but my mind was burning with fever, and I waited in utter despair. While I waited, I heard the song of the gypsies from afar, their chanting growing nearer, and with their song came the heavy sound of wheels turning and the crack of whips. The Scani and Slovaks the Count spoke of were coming. Looking one last time at the box containing the monstrous form, I fled from the scene and back to the Count's room, deciding to escape the moment the door was opened. With ears straining, I heard the key turn in the lock below, and a large door slammed shut. There must be another way out beneath, and someone else must have the key. As the heavy, deathly footsteps faded, leaving only the sounds echoing down the hall, I turned and went back to the crypt, where I might find a new escape route. But just then, I heard a strong gust of wind blow through, and the door leading to the spiral staircase slammed shut, sending a cloud of dust up into the air. When I ran to push it open, my hope quickly vanished. Once again, I was a prisoner, and the terrible web around me grew tighter with every passing moment. As I write these lines, I hear more heavy footsteps on the road below, powerful thuds. No doubt, the box the key being pulled out, other doors opening and closing. I hear the door locked and bolted again. Now, I am alone in the castle with those terrifying women. Fool, Mina is a woman too, but there's nothing like them. They are demons crawling out from the pit. I will not stay here alone with them. I will try to climb farther into the castle than I ever have before. I'll take some gold with me. I'll need it later. Perhaps I can find a way out of this cursed place. Now it's time to head home. Let's go to the fastest and nearest train. Get away from this cursed place. This cursed land where demons and their spawn still wander with footsteps that don't touch the earth. And in the end, God's mercy will be greater than these monsters.